a lot of prior work has focused on management career tracks, not as much is known about career paths of knowledge workers. To me, what stood out in this research and what was surprising was that there's a non-negligible share of individual contributors in high levels of the organization as well, right? And we shouldn't think that these are just admin support workers, right? These instead are strategic advisors, subject matter experts, other professionals. And, they may own a product or a process, but they do not supervise a team of workers. And so that's one surprising fact that we document. The second surprising fact, I think, was the magnitude of the gap in pay progression, in career dynamics between individual contributors and team leaders.
This research can really help CHROs and heads of talent management really reflect on two things. Organizations seem to be willing to pay a significant leadership premium. So they pay managers leadership a lot more than individual contributors and give them better opportunities, which means do they really have the positive impact on people and the business would be a question that we need to ask ourselves. If yes, how do we measure that? If not, what do we do about that? The second implication for the organizational practice is certainly to consider who in our employee population has the role of managers, who is most prone to be individual contributor, to look at demographics, to look at the differences in that gap that Ben just outlined in terms of are we happy with the gaps if they exist, and do we know our populations in either of those roles?
Where do these individual contributors show up in the organization? And we find they're close to the C-suite of the organization for many firms here. And that does emphasize their importance, right? And what we find is this big gap in pay, not just in pay, but also in pay growth and in promotion opportunities for individual contributors compared to team leaders.
But just thinking about the value that individual contributors potentially bring to the company on a daily basis, of course, with and through some of the good managers out there, is just a fascinating new perspective.
It also brings up questions around, can firms, value the contributions in these different roles correctly? Have they thought carefully about it? I mean, this is often a very difficult task, right? You think about the contribution of individual contributors that play a role in many parts of the organization. There might be a value to continuity because workers acquire institutional knowledge about the business, the clients, the products, right? They build relationships that are valuable, that are hard to replace. Now, the value of that is often only revealed when a person has left. Or actually, because there's high turnover among many of these knowledge workers, you may never realize what that potential value could look like if turnover is so high. Right. And so there is a lot of potential thinking about improving how we attract talent, how we develop and retain that talent. I think in general, firms need to think about talent as a strategic resource. And that's not just leadership talent, that's also knowledge workers. They're key to the success of many businesses. And turnover among these experts has been really high in recent years. So I think this problem is more prevalent, is more salient to organizations today. And it just raises the question, do companies have scope for improvements here in their talent strategy, right? And our results suggest that there is room for improvement, at least for some firms. There are some firms that have really well developed and established career ladders for experts, but many others don't. And even if they do, sort of the pay progression is very different. And if workers know this, if they don't sort of switch over to the leadership, to the corporate ladder, that's where the big steps up occur, and not if they stay on that quote unquote expert track. Thinking about what is it that makes good investment in career development for individual contributors doesn't have to be pay. It could be, but it could be other things, right? It could be increased internal lateral mobility. It could be, increasing project responsibility. It could be flexibility in maybe attending expert conferences, maybe setting hours, many different aspects of the work that these individual contributors might value and that companies could think about in that process of improving how they manage that talent.
The gender component that was highlighted in our survey in terms of more men than women want to be managers, the finding that we made in this poll really highlights again the cultural components within an organization. And so organizations are really just again encouraged to make a very intentional commitment to understanding their own gaps, whether it's being gender, whether it's being in terms of ethnicity, in terms of who is in a managerial role in the company and who isn't. And are they happy with this gap, or are they trying to close it?
I'm not surprised really that you see a lot more men in favor of taking, that step into management compared to women. I've seen that type of evidence in other organizations, and typically when you ask women why didn't they even apply for the first managerial role, right? This is a fact that you find in these studies. Well, then they will say that they're not interested in that type of job. And so now the question is it a preference, or is it sort of biases? Is it discrimination that's going on? That's a very difficult question to answer, but it's extremely important because there are these really persistent gaps in career achievement between men and women. And we need to think about, many organizations are lagging behind there, thinking about what are effective ways to address this gap. And so if you think about that, you need to think about what is the environment that you're creating for your leaders, what makes their jobs easier or harder, what makes this job attractive, maybe differentially for different groups of individuals. But that's exactly the question. Like, are we promoting the right people, and what type of inequities exist? How can we document them, and how can we think about solutions?
If we're thinking about how to retain and reward individual contributors, the question and the answer needs to start with more people data, better people data.
We can't sit here and guess that all they're looking for is more pay, right? That will definitely, no one will say no to that, but there might be many other aspects of the job and their responsibilities and their opportunities in the future that they will consider when they make these choices to switch jobs, to stay, and invest in a career at an organization for the longer term. And so I think what many firms have done in the past few years is they've introduced and expanded people analytics functions to keep a pulse of their workforce, to gain analytics insights, right, for better talent management.
The recent survey that we did to find out more about the motivation that people have to become leaders, to take on management roles, also pointed out that 3/4 of them, 71%, actually said the number one motivation and inspiration for them to take on managerial roles would be better pay. And of course, I think there's an inspiration gap that organizations have created in many ways to say, if pay is my only motivation to wanting to lead team, to help and enable others, team members, business units to perform, to be happy employees, to do a good job, that's just really not enough. What can we do as an organization, as an HR community, to help those people who want to become leaders perhaps, but also see the very rewarding motivational aspect behind leading others? And so what I've noticed, and what we all probably know, is that there is very little support for first-time level leaders, for even transitioning into higher leadership roles for those individuals. That is really intimidating, that can feel too stressful. So there's not really a motivation currently being created by the nature of the job, and money is basically the last kind of resort for those companies. That's not enough. Recommendation thereof is really to say, what is it that would make a good leader, and what are those wonderful, important, highly valuable tasks and responsibilities that managers are doing as part of their everyday job by enabling others and create a positive employee experience. So that would be my take on that particular survey, because if we can create a true inherent motivation and support those leaders and managers, then money may go away as the number one motivator to become manager and leader. I think if we are honing in on 3 recommendations for organizations to retain talent, it's always the same. Understand your people, understand what the employee experience looks like, what it feels like to work there. How can we reward employees even better? How can we make them feel part of a belonging, a place of work? Of course, part of that is compensation. We've learned a lot from our own compensation research around pay at market rate. There are sweet spots invariably in the organization. There are more and less pay-sensitive populations that need to be understood better to hone in and not do the peanut butter spread approach. So, but again, people data is at the core of the question and the solution, and also of the tracking towards success. Of course, I shouldn't say there is an end to it. There's never probably going to be an end to it, but understanding it better requires data, consistent data, longitudinal data, high quality data.
We're not advocating a zero-sum game here where firms sort of spend more resources on individual contributors while spending less on managers. I think we're just posing the question whether, some companies could benefit from investing more in these individual contributors if they have overlooked them to some extent in the past. And really at the core is think about your priorities. Think about talent as a strategic resource and try to collect data to solidify those types of strategic decisions, how you should invest, who you should invest in, and what types of investments are most effective. We're really grateful for this collaboration with Visier, because as a researcher, academic researcher, getting an opportunity to analyze that type of live data, granular data within organizations is, as I said in the beginning, this is extremely rare. And it's a huge opportunity for the research community, for the academic community to gain insight into what happens in organizations today.
This is the future of research. Having a real life events-driven database with the academic and scientific rigor to apply it, to ask the right questions, to come to conclusions that are both academically solid as well as highly relevant for business context. That is the future of research in HR.